The average income of the top 1% of all Californians before 2008 was 1.8 million. So you can imagine what the average of the top 0.5% would be. The annual income increase of the top 1% in declared taxable income, in AGI, was $128,000 a year. $128,000 a year was triple the total income of the average California taxpayer. My colleagues have calculated that incomes are now so unequal that it would only cost the median taxpayer $32 extra to roll expenditures and funding for higher education back to the levels they were in 2000. But incomes are so unequal that while it would cost the median taxpayer $32, it would cost the average taxpayer $3,800, more than 10 times as much. In other words, the average tax return is that much higher than the median tax return. If income gains were distributed in the same proportion as the era on which UC based its financial plan, and we really had a sliding scale in which everyone paid the same percentage of income that middle income families now pay to attend UC, which is nearly 18%, the average taxpayer who paid 18% and was in the top 1% of our income distribution would pay UC tuition of about $400,000 a year. Or to put the point the other way, if income growth had remained as equal as it was during the period when UC developed its plan, the average Californian would be $9,000 richer and much better able to pay higher taxes than he or she is at present. So here's the problem. Is a democratic form of tax-supported public higher education really just a product of a temporary blip in our economic history when incomes were, in fact, more equal? Or can democracy itself be invoked to reverse a tendency toward inequality that has increased as a result of neoliberalism? In other words, is privatization simply what made sense while we were passing through a change from a relatively equal income distribution to an obscenely unequal distribution at a time when it seemed plausible that higher education itself was the cause of the income distribution? I think what is essential for us and for our movement is to ask whether we really think it is okay, that it would be just fine for higher education to be a driver of greater economic inequality. And also to ask whether we think it is okay to mislead our students into believing that this is still true. If this is not okay, then we have to recognize that we are facing a political dilemma. It should be very easy. It should be very easy to sell taxpayers on the idea that the tax burden really falls on very few Californians. 40% of all income taxes are paid by the top 1.5%. So why isn't this a good moment to return to taxpayer financing, since the median taxpayer would only pay $32, for example, to avoid having to go into debt to attend a UC, a CSU, or a community college? Why can't we sell this idea? Well, one reason is that we haven't tried. We haven't tried because we are all complicit in the myth that higher education provides the kind of income insurance that it seemed to provide during the high-tech boom. But another reason is debt itself. My hypothesis is that the more you owe in interest, the less you are willing to pay in taxes. that interest is the kind of upflow of income to the financial sector that taxes are to the public sector. So that our own students who will graduate with $12,000 or $13,000 in debt, our own graduate students who will graduate with $80,000 to $160,000 in debt, will be less and less likely to want higher taxes while they are repaying their student loans out of very low income. The Obama administration has provided some relief to people paying student loans in the sense that it has said that people who are up to date on their student loans and have made every payment can stop paying after 25 years, regardless of how much they owe. But that's kind of what the economist, like what the economist Hyman Minsky called Ponzi borrowing. 25 years, in other words, is exactly as much time as it would take you to put a kid in school who can borrow enough to pay off your student loans. And that is exactly what we don't want. We need a different message, a different theory that will put UC and public higher education in general on the side of greater equality in the society. And we need to recognize that our leaders have put us on the side of greater inequality, even though that is not the message that most of us want to portray university as carrying when we get into the classroom. What we need to do in every way possible, in other words, is to directly attack the idea that is very common in the third world, that took hold after the Cold War, that indebting the poor through credit schemes, through subprime lending, is an alternative to making them richer, especially as income gaps grow. This idea was first developed in the third world after revolution and redistribution were off the table. The idea that what poor people really lack is collateral. So if they can mortgage their hovel, they can borrow. And if they can borrow against their hovel, then all they need to do to justify being able to borrow more is to apply for it. Because guess what? In the third world, urban real estate was growing in value faster than the economy. So you could engage in Ponzi borrowing by simply borrowing against the increased collateral value of your hovel, unless you couldn't pay by refinancing, in which case, guess what? Your hovel becomes part of first world global capitalism. More urban property is simply developable. Higher education is basically the same financial theory. The same financial theory applied to a different index spread, economic growth versus income inequality. And I think, and I'll be finished in a moment, I think we need to be able to say, what is wrong with this? We need to say what is wrong with this because our leaders won't. We need to talk about how fragile it all is, how dependent it was on the growth of private credit markets, how dependent it was on particular situations in the origin of high tech that made it impossible to train for those jobs. We need to talk about how exploitative it is, how it exploits inequality in a way that increases inequality. And we need to talk about how cynical it is, because we need to state a coherent public reason why students shouldn't be blamed for taking out more in loans than they can pay back. And above all, we need to develop a whole series of policy issues that articulate the ways in which public education differs from private education, not merely on the basis of the values it teaches, but also on the basis of the material values that it embodies in how it finances itself. Now, I have a whole series of things to say about this, of particular proposals that we can address. We need to have a proposal, a counter-proposal for everything that they propose. My sources inside financial aid tell me, for example, that it would be very easy to simply say no one should pay more than 8% of family income to go to UC, People with families earning $50,000 pay 8%. If you earn $9,000, there really is $90,000. Your family does. There's a sliding scale, so it goes up to 18%. Those are the people who are, or maybe missing from UC. But if your family earns $200,000, it goes down to 8% again. What would be the cost of capping family contribution at 8%? The financial aid people have costed it out. It's $100,000. But UC won't commit itself to doing that. Why can't we demand that? That's something that is really on the student side. Why can't we demand that tuition increases essentially be accompanied by a higher and higher progressive rate of taxation on the return to financial aid? And if UC is really serious, for example, about the idea that there is an income spread that is due to education, a spread that hasn't gone up in the past 10 years since it really adopted that idea, why not say that all students simply have the option of paying X% of their income, let's say 1 or 1.5% for X number of years, let's say 20 or 25, so that the cost of their education will be higher if their incomes are higher and lower if their incomes are lower, and see whether students and UC itself are serious about their own theory. There are so many proposals that we can make, so many actions that we can do, so many essential ways that we can reach out to other constituencies in the public and among our own students. To work out these things, we need an analysis. I've tried to lay out what such an analysis might look like, but we also need a vision. And what is that vision? Well, there is nothing fundamentally wrong with the vision that UC once had, namely that education does produce economic growth, but that economic growth should produce greater income equality rather than greater income gaps. UC's leaders have not been able to articulate the public value of public higher education, because they are selling the idea that income inequality is our most important product. I think we can sell the opposite idea, and that's the plan of action I'd like to urge upon you. It's a plan of action that requires the unity of UC, of CSU, of the community college, and our colleagues and brethren whose jobs, because there are jobs, are now in the for-profit sector. And with that, I conclude.